So today I want to talk about exile and sojourning. This has been a topic that's been on my mind for several years now. And you're not going to get away by just sitting in the pew. I like to have some participation. And so I would like to hear what your thoughts are on exile and sojourning. So does anyone have any ideas what exile and what sojourning is? And I'm calling your names, except I don't know everybody's names. But I do know William's name. There's a couple Williams. So, exiles to be sent out. Okay. Sent out from where?
I associate exile with being sent out from where you're from or maybe where you're living.
Okay. So exile is to be cast out of where you're living or where you're from?
For example, when Judah and Benjamin left Jerusalem and got taken to Babylon, they were exiled from their homeland. They were in exile until they came back.
Okay. So that's one of the most famous exiles. When people think about the Bible, they think about Israel being exiled to Babylon. And then we get the stories of the fiery furnace and Nebuchadnezzar. We get some stories about Daniel. We get stories about Nehemiah and coming back to the Israel after their exile. So there was a portion of exile. How about sojourning? What's the difference between sojourning and exile? Back row? Any ideas? Uncle Scott?
I have
No clue. Tanya?
I think sojourning is where you're a pilgrim. It's not really your home, but you're just living there.
Okay.
Exile being forced, sojourn meaning you're willingly taking a journey.
Right. Okay, I really like this because we have sojourning that is a willingness in a voluntary position of leaving somewhere, and we have exile, which is an involuntary leaving. But what do they have in common? Both a sojourner and an exile are not at home. Neither one of them are at home. And so my next question for you, well, actually we're not going to do a question. I'm going to do a question after this next thought. So you mentioned the exile that came from Israel when they left for Babylon. Are there any other examples of sojourning and being in exile in the Bible? Is this just sort of a one-off concept? Or can you guys think of some other folks that may have been sojourners or exiles?
All of Israel was left Egypt, right?
Okay, so yes? Yes. And did Abraham know where he was going?
No.
He didn't have any idea of it. He voluntarily left, and he left his home. He left all the security and everything he had at home and left. And that would be terribly scary at that time because there was no army or police or anything. You were basically walking through the desert, hoping you didn't get taken advantage of. All right, so we have an example of Abraham. We have an example of Israel. Who else was a sojourner or an exile?
I'll say Jesus.
Jesus. So why was Jesus let's just say a sojourner?
He left his home.
He left his home.
Left his home and came to us, not his home.
I love that. Not many people think of Jesus as being a sojourner, but he is probably the number one sojourner in the Bible. He left a home that was perfect, and he came here to redeem us. At great sacrifice. Anyone else have some other sojourners?
So Jacob leaves his home to go to his mother's family,
Yes?
and he ends up being there like 27 years or something like that.
Right. So you have Jacob. All right, so let's go to the beginning of the Bible. Who was the first person in exile? Adam and Eve, right? Adam and Eve, they were put into exile. Cain, next, was put into exile. All right, let's go to that last book of the Bible. Where was Revelation written from? Patmos. And who was in exile? John was in exile. All right. Could I convince you all that there might be a theme in the Bible about sojourning and exile? Could you believe maybe Mary and Joseph maybe left their home at one point and went into Egypt? How about Joseph? How about Paul? So there seems to be a theme in the Bible about exile and sojourning. There must be a lesson for us there. In fact, in 1 Peter, I'll go there. 1 Peter, let me get my verses here. This is 1 Peter 2. We'll start in verse 11. It said, "Beloved, I urge you, as sojourners and exiles." See, this isn't my idea. Anything I say up here is not my idea. You have to go to the Bible and look at it for yourselves. So don't believe it just because I say it. But for some reason, Peter puts together, "Beloved, I urge you as sojourners and exiles to abstain from the passions of the flesh, which wage war against your soul." The whole book of 1 Peter is written to exiles and sojourners. It even starts out at the very beginning in verse 1. It talks about, "To those who are elect exiles of the dispersion." So even the church, in a sense, during the period first century, the church was put under persecution and they became exiles and sojourners, and that's how the gospel spread throughout the Roman Empire. So the Lord continues to use exile and sojourning to advance his will on this earth. What's interesting is in Deuteronomy chapter 10, starting in verse 7, I believe. 17. Deuteronomy 10:17. It says, "For the Lord your God is a God of gods and Lord of lords, the great, the mighty, and the awesome God." Does anyone believe that? That he's Lord of lords and he's God of gods? "Who is not partial and takes no bribe. He executes justice for the fatherless and the widow." He looks after those that are most at risk, those are most vulnerable, and he loves the sojourner, giving him food and clothing. Isn't this odd? We often talk about the widows and the orphans, but we don't talk about the sojourners very often. And I ask you, why does God love a sojourner? Why does God show preference to a sojourner? And this is not a rhetorical question necessarily, but I'd like you to think about this as we go through this message about why God says specifically and calls out sojourners. He actually tells in Exodus, Israel, he says, "Remember the sojourners because you were once sojourners. Show hospitality." In 1 Peter, it says, "Show hospitality without grumbling," because you are to look after the sojourners and the foreigners and the strangers in your land. So Lord has a special place for sojourners and exiles on this earth. And so I ask you again, why? Why does he even care about a sojourner and an exile? Okay, so I hear in the back that we are supposed to be an exile and a sojourner. Who in this room is an exile and a sojourner? Everyone? But don't you have homes? So I see that there's maybe 4 of you that are exiles and sojourners. The rest of you must have homes and are real comfortable, or you didn't raise your hand. A commitment here? Any exile sojourners out there? Okay, so what are you looking for, Uncle Scott? What isn't here that you're wanting? What's not at your home?
It seems to me that when you sojourn, it's based entirely on the faith that the individual possesses. He doesn't know what he's going to run into. Robbers, thieves. He doesn't know what he's going to eat. So when he sojourns and he's going, he's basing his faith primarily on the sinner, the one who told him, you go, things will be all right.
I can tell you follow the Lord. What you say and what comes out of your mouth is seeped in like lots of wisdom and knowledge. And you have a lot to give this congregation. And I really appreciate what you have to say as far as men of faith in walking forward and women of faith walking forward in faith. Because you're jumping ahead of me, but that's fine because I love it. The Lord has the opportunities to speak. I like to leave room for him to like interrupt our lives and take us in different directions. Because we want to have our lives planned. We want our lives to be in control, and we resist the intervention of the Lord, his holy interruption in our lives. We want desperately to control our environment. And that environment for most people is comfort. We want comfort. That's what we want our home to be. We want our home to be comfortable. We want our homes to be secure. We want our homes to overflow with provision. We as humans desperately want home. And we build a home around ourselves. We build a home that represents kind of the Garden of Eden again. See, if you went to Babylon and you went to Syria in the ancient days, the kings and rulers would build these elaborate gardens. They would build these walled gardens and they'd plant all kinds of vegetables and types of fruit trees, and they would put animals in the garden. And see, they were trying to sort of recreate the Garden of Eden because that was home. It was going to be beautiful. It was going to be a place of rest from the harshness outside. And my wife this year is gardening, and she gets a lot of joy when she sees the plants come up. But then the pests come and punch a hole in that home, and they eat the leaves, and they ravage the plants. And she recognizes, this is no Garden to Eden. This is chemical warfare time. We need to take out those little pests and get rid of them. I think Disney does a really nice job of trying to create a home. So you go to their amusement parks and everything's swept up. Everything looks shiny. All the people are smiling. But all of our attempts to create this home, this place of like comfort and security, is sort of elusive. We have this like aroma or this taste of what home should be, and we work really hard to create home here on earth. And if we can just create a beautiful enough garden, if we can just create a beautiful amusement park, then we will feel at home. And so there's a lot of effort put into creating home. And then TV, they portray a home of this perfect family. But see, the Lord allows those homes of we'll call wood, stubble, and hay to periodically get punched a hole in to remind us that we're not able to recreate a home. Has anyone experienced that? Has anyone's plans been disrupted? Has anyone felt like, wow, I've been trying to do all this and it's just vanity? Does that echo a little bit of some of the words in the Old Testament? So who was the great builder in the gardens and the planner of beautiful things? What's that? Solomon. Solomon tried to do all kinds of things to recreate an environment of home, an environment of plenty, a land of milk and honey, a land of beauty. And so we have this example in the Old Testament of somebody trying to create home. But home is not really home And the Lord continues to interrupt our lives to remind us that this is not our home. So I believe that exile and sojourning is a lot like fasting. I believe that exile and sojourning is a lot like circumcision. I believe that when you're forced out of your home and the Lord reminds us that this isn't our home, it cuts away all of the paper mache home that we've created around ourselves. It gets rid of the facade and all the things that dull us to His grace towards us. That He rocks our world and He shakes our world so that what is temporary falls away and what eternal remains. And the natural position as a human is to curse God. I can't believe you allowed me to go bankrupt. I can't believe that you allowed somebody to break into our house. I can't believe that you took that person from me. That's the natural response, I believe. And it is a justifiable and it is a response. But I will propose to you that when you are in exile and you are a sojourner, that when all of that facade is taken away, God meets you there. And it becomes most evident in those situations that God loves us and desires to bring us home. So I'm going to use a recent experience of mine. So from March until May, my two sons, age 17 and was 13 but turned 14 on the trail, walked from the Red Sea to Dan, which is on the Syrian-Jordan border. It took us 2 months to make that hike. We walked 550 miles. And as I flew into Tel Aviv, we had our backpacks, but we had no car rental. We had no hotels. We knew very few people in Israel. The people we did know in Israel was because we had a missionary friend that had some parents in Israel. So we were entering into land where we knew no one. And I tell you, it was easier than Abraham, because Abraham didn't have an app, and he didn't have a credit card, and he didn't have a lot of things. And as Israel fled out of Egypt, they didn't have water fountains, they didn't have convenience stores, and we criticized them for not having faith. So my experience is going to be only a sliver of what Abraham and Israel might have experienced as they were on their sojourn. But I got a little bit of an idea that I want to share with you. Because in Revelation it says they overcome by the blood of the Lamb and the testimony. And so this is a testimony to you all about what it looks like when you strip away all of this facade, all the comfort of our home in Kansas, all of the things that we use to cope with our problems, and we make ourselves vulnerable for 2 months and wander. So I'm here to declare that the Lord is good, that His grace is everlasting, but I'll tell you, I don't see it in my comfort. I don't see it in my home in Kansas. But I did see it as we wandered in the Negev desert. So one of the amazing things the Lord does is He engages us in the mundane, the small things. And sometimes those make the biggest impact. So one day I was walking, and I have limited amount of toilet paper, and I'm like, my nose is running, and I really want to blow my nose, but I don't want to waste my toilet paper on blowing my nose, because there's priorities, and blowing my nose is not the first priority. So I was like, Lord, it's silly. Why would I talk to my Creator about blowing my nose? But when you're in the desert, you have little to think about all day long while you're walking. And I was like, Lord, I don't know what to do. I really want to use my toilet paper to blow my nose, but I know I don't have a lot. And I open my eyes and look down at the trail, and right in front of me is a package of tissue laying right in the trail. Do you realize the orchestration that was required to put that piece of toilet paper or that tissue? It was perfectly wrapped. It was one of those little Kleenex things in plastic. It's about this thick and about this wide. Someone would have had to have bought that. Someone would have had to have carried that in the desert. Someone would have had to unintentionally dropped it in the desert. And someone would have had to do it at exactly the time that I was walking by. See, when I'm living in Kansas and I need to blow my nose, there are 50 tissue boxes in the house, and I never have to really think about it. But when you're on the trail and you don't have a lot, and everything's been stripped away, toilet paper laying in the middle of the trail is an amazing miracle of God's grace. He cares for us in the small things, and He loves us. So we were still walking in the desert, and I went to Africa a few years ago with my oldest son, and I worked on a house, and I got heat exhaustion. And so when I'm in the desert, I sweat like a pig, I guess. And so my boys are not sweating at all, and I'm just drenched. And we're walking through the desert, and I'm like, it's getting really hot, like Phoenix hot. And I'm like, it was a beautiful blue sky, and I was like, Lord, it's really hot, and I have to climb that mountain in front of us. And I was like, it sure would be nice to have some cloud cover, because for some reason Isaiah 40 had been on my mind, and he talks about the young becoming weary at the end, but He's our sustainer. And I was like, you have a whole universe to rule. You have all these responsibilities. But once again, your mind is kind of empty as you're walking through the desert. You really don't have many distractions. You don't have your cell phone. You don't have any of that stuff. And so I was just sort of ruminating on the weather and stuff. And I said, Lord, it would just be really nice if there was some cloud cover. And within a half an hour, clouds started to develop over the top of me as I walked. And as we climbed that mountain, there was a light mist falling. And I was just like, Lord, why would you change meteorological situations in this land for me? Why would you have so much love for me that you would cover me? It's not like I'm going to die, but it certainly adds to my comfort. And I just really began to be appreciative and sensitive to what the Lord was doing. The tissue paper, the clouds, the mist, in the middle of the desert. Why, Lord, why would you do this for me? So I had prayed when we went on this trip that the Lord would walk with us, that He would be with us, that I would be in His presence. And you know what? He walked with us. And I don't know why, because I'm not significant in this world. I'm really kind of just a nobody. But He was paying attention to us. So as we left Arad, which is north of the Negev, as you started to enter the Judean desert, there's an ascent, one of the first big ascent as you start out of the desert going up. And it was unusually rainy this year, and I really wasn't too concerned about getting wet as much as I was about the lightning. And so my sons and I had just gone through a Bedouin village. I had seen some things on YouTube about this Bedouin village, that there were some dogs, stray dogs, that had bit some hikers in the past. And these kids were sort of harassing us as we were walking. I don't know if they're harassing or just interested, but I can't understand what they speak because I don't speak Aramaic, or not Aramaic, Arabic. And I don't speak Hebrew. So that had been kind of on my mind. Once we got through the Bedouin village, we were still hiking, and then we saw these storm clouds starting to develop around us. And I could hear the lightning in the distance, and we were really exposed because we were out in these wheat fields. And the mountain that we were going to climb was really just rock. And so you were highly exposed. And it kept on walking, and suddenly the lightning started coming down around us. And I opened my eyes, and there's a cave right there. And so the boys and I crawl into this cave, and we sit in this cave and watch it rain, and this shepherd boy, 2 shepherds came up, and they were grazing their sheep right out in front of the cave, and one of the kids probably was like 8. He walks around, looks in the cave, and he screams. He wasn't expecting to see us in the cave. We sat there for about a half an hour, and it poured, and the sheep got really wet, and so did the shepherds. And then there was a break in the rain, and we started climbing this mountain, and it was misty and cool, and I just gave the Lord praise and thanks, because that's what the Bible says is what we should be doing, is giving the Lord praise, and we should be giving him thanks for what he's done. And we hiked up this mountain, and I just felt the presence of the Lord, which was really what I was looking for all along, is the presence of the Lord. And there was tremendous comfort in that process as we walked up that mountain. And at the top of the mountain, there's a community that has this tent for all the hikers. They can stay in this tent for free. And we walk in that tent, and the heavens just open, and it just rains like crazy. See, the Lord looked after us. We got to that tent when everyone else was soaked and we were dry, not because we were special, but because I think we were sensitive to the Lord and what he was doing. And what would you know, on the first day of Passover, on the last day of unleavened bread, on the Sabbaths it always rained, but on the regular days it was mainly sunny. You see, the Lord was meeting us and walking with us as sojourners in his land. And I think it was really important because it gives me an opportunity to testify of his grace, of his preference for each one of you, for all of us in this room. But we see that normally in our distress, when we afflict our bodies through fasting, when we afflict our time by prayer, when we actually strip away all of the distractions and the entanglements that we build around ourselves to recreate a home. See, we have a tendency to forget. We have a tendency to forget that we're sojourners. We have a tendency to forget that we're exiles. So I'll back up for just 1 second. Does anyone have any revelation why God loves the sojourner? Why does God pick out in Deuteronomy and say, I love the sojourner? I don't see any hands, so we'll continue.
Can I say this one?
Go ahead.
Just think that they're the most vulnerable, so he gets to be the most himself, which is giving and blessing.
So you're saying that the people that are most vulnerable, that see God's grace, are the most likely to offer praise and thanksgiving, possibly? Is that what you're going for? I don't want to put words in your mouth.
One step further, I was just thinking, when you don't have anything, he gets to show himself, he gets to reveal his glory. And then likewise, you would praise him. Thank you.
Yeah, so when you have the least, you're most likely to see that in your life. So the orphans and the widows would sort of fall into that same position, I believe, especially in that time.
It gives you meaning to walking by faith. There's no option because all you have is what you're carrying and to rely on faith.
Yes.
You're giving everything over to him.
Yeah, I do think there's a lot of truth in there, because when you put yourself at risk, and see, I think risk is a critical component of faith. I'm not going to go into this, but I really believe that you really can't show faith unless there's risk involved. But when Abraham left, like you said, he was at risk. He was at risk of the tribes, the peoples, the wild animals. He didn't have the opportunity to call back to Ur and say, send in the reinforcements. He was vulnerable and he was out there. The kings were coming to plunder his goods, and God was with him. There's no reason that he should have been able to go back out and capture the kings and bring Lot and his family back when they were captured. But yeah, I can't even imagine. It's just unfathomable to think about what Abraham was doing. It is unfathomable to think about Israel leaving Egypt and about wandering in the desert. That desert is brutal. You know about the desert. But if there's no water around and you're 3 days in, I'm going to be the first to be complaining. When there's no food, I'm going to be the first to be complaining. You see, we tend to forget about the difficulties and trials that they were going through, but they were humans like us. And you know what? Who showed up? Who showed up over and over and over again? See, Israel suffered from amnesia a bit because they forgot that they were sojourners. They forgot that they were exiles. When the going got tough, they said, our home is over there. Let's go back over the Red Sea. Let's go back to Egypt because that's where our comfort is. That's where our security. Pharaoh protected us. Pharaoh fed us. You know, Lot's wife, she forgot that she was a sojourner. She wanted to go back to Sodom and Gomorrah. And I ask you, where do you place your security? Where do you place your home? Where is your home? What's interesting is when Israel went back to the Promised Land in the 1940s, they felt that that was a fulfillment of what the Lord had on their lives. That was their home. They were going back to Palestine. That was their home. And you know how they greet themselves when you see somebody on the trail? They say shalom. Shalom, shalom. Shalom means peace. So when you say hi, their greeting is peace. And so you walk through the entire land, you hear peace, peace. But I ask you, is there peace in Israel? Is there peace in Israel? See, when Israel went back after their exile back to Canaan, they were building the temple, and what was the problem? Did they feel like they were home? They were crying. They were saying, this temple isn't anything like the temple before. Because there was something missing. And what I'm here to tell you, we have a tendency to forget, and we have a tendency to try to recreate home here. We forget we're sojourners, and we tend to create homes, just like Lot's wife, just like the Israelites, where we have comfort. We try to create gardens just like Solomon did. We try to create this home. We try to go back to the garden. We try to recreate the garden where there was fruit on every tree, there was water flowing everywhere. Everything was there for us. And I ask you, if you were back in the Garden of Eden, would that be home? You say no. Why would it not be home?
God's kingdom is our home. That's where we're looking for. We're looking for the New Jerusalem.
Okay?
We're looking for the future.
So you're looking for the future in a New Jerusalem. If you were given a kingdom of where the streets are paved in gold and there's a stream that heals all of your sicknesses and the fruit, on the side of either stream healed all your sicknesses and there was eternal life, would you be home? If Jesus was there. If his presence was there. Because you remember back when Moses was wandering as a sojourner, he said, we'll stay in this desert. If you won't go over with us into the promised land, into what represented the kingdom, then I'm not going. I'm going to stay here with you. I don't want to go with an angel into the promised land. David said, my desire is not to have riches beyond all desire. My desire is to reside in the presence of the Lord. So because we all suffer from amnesia, God gives us something annually to remind us that we are sojourners in this world. Anyone have an idea of what he gives us? The Feast of Tabernacles. We live in temporary booths because he needs us to exit the facade of home that we have. And there is the tabernacle, the house, but that's really not why we're going. If you were just to go sit in this four-walled booth, temporary dwelling, you would just basically be cold and exposed to the elements. But he's asking us, come and be with me. Come where my name is placed. Because if his name's not there, you don't want to go, no matter how fancy it is. So the Lord does give us something to remind us continuously that we are exiles and sojourners in this land. And he has so much grace for us that he can punch holes in this false facade and remind us that we are just journeying here temporarily. So the things that I would like you to take away from this is to remind you that you are a sojourner and an exile. And in that position of being a sojourner and an exile, you are being essentially circumcised to be more sensitive to the Lord, to listen to him. When you're at camp at Prescott and it rains on you and the heat comes down on you and you're not at home, would you remember that the Lord is good? Because he does show up at camp. He is going to show up in your lives if you will just remove this facade that is covering you. And this facade that we're creating is not really a good substitute for home. Because the Lord said in Genesis, he said, we need to cast these people out of the garden lest they take of the tree and live forever. See, Adam and Eve had begun to worship the creation instead of the Creator. They had started to worship the garden, the apple, more than they were worshiping the Creator. And so he didn't want them to be forever eternally separated from him by worshiping the creation instead of the Creator. And so the Lord is not looking for us to find home in a place, in an environment. What the Lord is seeking, and William alluded to this, is a relationship with him. And there's no better verse in my estimation than the one I'm going to leave you with. It's in Revelation 21. And Mr. Cookman actually alluded to this earlier. He started quoting it. And I'm just going to read it and sort of talk about it through a perspective of a sojourner. Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth has passed away, and the sea was no more. And I saw a holy city, New Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride adorned for her husband. And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, and I think this is really important, behold, the dwelling place of God is with man. This is the home. This is the emphasis where God is going to dwell. He will dwell with them, and they will be his people, and God himself will be with them as their God. So throughout the whole Old Testament, there's this phrase that goes from Genesis all the way through, and it says, they will be my people, and I will be their God. Because that is what God is striving for. See, what we're desiring in home is exactly what it says next. He will wipe away every tear from their eyes. Home is having comfort, and death will be no more. Neither shall there be any crying, nor pain anymore, for the former things have passed away. See, when we're at home, there are no more tears. There is no more death. And why is that? Because the Lord is dwelling with us. And he who is seated on the throne said, behold, I am making all things new. And he said, write this down, for these words are trustworthy and true. And he said to me, it is done. I am the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. And now he goes to Isaiah. See, when you're walking in the desert, you're thirsty. And when you're walking in the desert as a sojourner and an exile, you're hungry. And to the thirsty I will give from the spring of the water of life without payment. The one who conquers will have this heritage, and I will be his God, and he will be my son. See, home is where the heart is. Home is where your dad is. Home is where your mom is. Home is about family more than it is about how many rooms, how many bathrooms, what your yard looks like. Continue to sojourn. Continue to be vulnerable. Continue to place off all the distractions that you can see God's grace coming through because he cares about each one of you on an individual basis. And if you'll become unentangled, he will meet you in the small things. He will meet you with the tissue paper. He will meet you with the mist. He will meet you with a shelter because our God is a refuge. He is a strong tower. He is dependable, much more dependable than what we create around us. So brethren, brothers and sisters, let's look forward to the day when we finally go home.